Welcome to Sticky Ventures Podcast, where Mike and Ted dig into the obvious things people ignore to help you build amazing startups.
My name is McClure. I'm CEO of Sticky Ventures. We're a venture studio that builds and backs SaaS startups. And welcome to our podcast. Today, I'm talking to my partner and co-host, Ted Yang. And today we're going to start off by talking about I guess this is going to be the first in a series of talks about these things that we've come to call Ted's Maxims, from his experience in entrepreneurship and investing. And so I think today we're going to start off with one of our favorite ones. And it's a maxim that I think both Ted and I have developed independently, but Ted's version of it goes, your idea ain't worth shit. So, Ted, why don't you sort of kick off? Like, what do you mean when you say that, someone's idea isn't worth shit?
Yeah. Hey, so hi, Mike, and thanks everyone for listening. We'll try to make this as valuable for you as possible. So when I say that, that your idea isn't worth shit, it's kind of tough love, right? It might be difficult for founders to hear. But one of the things, a kind of story from my experience is the more someone thinks that they've got that crazy, super hot idea that no one needs to know about, the more people have asked me to sign an NDA before they'll tell me about this really great idea. Honestly, the less original and the less good that idea tends to be. And what I've come to learn, and you've come to learn, I think a lot of people have come to learn, is that ideas by themselves aren't valuable. What really matters when you're doing a startup, when you're building a company, is the execution. And this is the reason that you and I are building a venture studio, because we think that experience really matters. But it is also, I think, a lesson for people who just are starting this journey, or even thinking about this journey, because a lot of the times the winning idea out there, it's not the person that came up with it first; it's the person that got it right.
Yeah. No, I mean, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that people, don't think about. I sort of share this anecdote a lot as well, where a lot of us have sort of that uncle who, across the Thanksgiving table maybe says, "Oh yeah, well, I saw this thing on TV and I thought of that 10 years ago," but people just don't realize, what it takes to actually get something off the ground. And so, all right, so let's sort of segue from there. I mean, if the idea really isn't the key factor, and this is really about execution, what are some early things that people can do to set themselves up for success?
Yeah, I think the first thing you got to do is figure out who's on your team, right? And this, I'm sure people have heard that from other places. But one thing I say to people is that you're going to spend more time with your co-founders than you're going to spend with your partner, right? Your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your wife, whatever, your husband. And it's true, right? And you're going to be in the same ways, going through the highs and the lows. You're going to be in the trenches. You're going to be on the top of the mountain. And you really need to figure out who those people are, and who you want with you. And there's nothing that compares to having experience. This is not something that is for the faint-hearted. And this by mean starting up companies or being an entrepreneur. It is certainly for people who take risks, but nothing compares to people who've already taken risks, who people have been down the journey. Now, by definition, no one's been down that exact same journey with you, right? Every company's its own little experience. But that doesn't mean you try to do it on your own, right? You hear all the time stories about people, Zuckerberg or whatever. Oh yeah, pretty much I did it on my own, right? Or I didn't need anyone else. And those things are written by the winners. The truth is, even if you do it like that, I don't even think that's that fun, right? So it's greatly reduces your chances of succeeding, but also, frankly, it reduces, the journey of getting there and makes it less interesting. So I think it's important to find out who's in the boat with you, and to make sure that people in that boat have done stuff like this before, preferably with the experience that's directly relevant to the kind of company that you're starting.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can definitely relate to that. I mean, it's actually funny when I started off as an entrepreneur, sort of unreasonably young, in my early 20s. I was kind of told the same thing actually by you, and also by another investor who, I mean, that I think the biggest takeaway that I took from my conversations with him, his name is Sean Glass. He's actually still an investor down in the DC area, and he basically told me, look, your idea is good, everything it seems like a great idea. It's like, you have no idea what you're doing. I was like a 22-year-old or 23-year-old, pitching for venture investment, and in hindsight, while maybe to his point, I had the potential, I didn't have the people on my team around me, to really be able to help that succeed. I had a lot of other sort of green young guys, and that's just, that's not going to work, right? I mean, in hindsight, I realized how naive I was.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, people found companies with their friends, right? You find, the typical, I founded that in my dorm room, right? And it's like, well, who stopped by my room that day? And they're like, hey, you guys want to start a company?
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
You
no,
know,
it's true. And that piece of feedback of like, sort of cool idea, but you really need to go and build your team. I took that to heart, and over the course of 10 years or so, I sort of have done that, and I think we've done that now with Sticky Ventures. So, you know, I think it's a pretty exciting thing, and I hope that a lot of founders take this seriously, because it really is so much, especially from an investor perspective, at early stages, about the team.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, all right.
I mean, really, honestly, there's not much else out there, right? I mean, I'm sure people out there built prototypes and things like this, and again, but no single person takes it all the way. And by all the way here, I mean even to seed funding,
Oh
right?
yeah. No, I mean, it's extremely rare and difficult. And the more I've been in this process with various different ways, the more I see how difficult it is, even with experienced people on your team, right? There's a fair amount of luck involved, right? So, speaking of luck, um, there's a lot of things, especially at early stages, that are sort of outside of a founder's control. And some of them are sort of just like the conditions of the market that they're working in, the fundraising market. But also, I think, from my perspective, one of the big things, and I think from a lot of investors' perspectives, is timing, right? So, I mean, what are your thoughts on these sort of factors that are outside of a founder's control? I mean, anyone can go out and build their team. It might take some time, but what about these things like timing and market?
Yeah, I mean, timing is critical, right? Timing is critical. I think a lot of times, well, first of all, you never really know the truth of why you don't get funded or why it didn't succeed, right? You have some hypotheses. People tend not to be honest about that, especially because, hey, you might have a good idea down the road, and I don't want to turn people off, right? So you never really truly know. But the reality of it is, a lot of times it's just the wrong timing for you or the people who might be funding. Maybe they heard that idea again recently. Maybe they funded a company like that in the past and got burned. Maybe the overall market is strong or weak. Like obviously, right now we're in a situation where it is difficult for companies to get funded, you see funds and angels backing the companies they've already put money into. It's the reality is it's survivorship bias, right? I mean, we look at the companies that happened afterwards and we go, what did they get right? What did they get wrong? There's a lot of that stuff that's beyond their control. And I think the important advice here for entrepreneurs is to control the timing to the degree that you can. And what I mean by that is that there are situations where I call it like the starting gun hasn't gone off yet, right? So for example, when you're still talking it over, you're still putting your team together, you're still kind of working on that, first prototype or MVP, you're working your day job, you're still in school or whatever it is. And there really isn't any external factor controlling the time of when that, when you really need to deliver something, because you don't have a customer, or you don't have an investor, right? So the only people that are kind of holding you to account are you. Now that's a difficult thing. That's like, some people have a challenge doing that. We don't have someone else like basically setting the beat for you, but we'll talk about that in a different podcast. The relevant part here is that the timing for getting that done is, because it's set by you, means you can pick and choose a little bit when you want to go into the market and let yourself be shown, right? This is the quote unquote stealth mode that you hear a lot of people doing, right? And so what I would say is, listen, if there is no external factor driving your timing, and maybe difficult or really terrible to get something funded, well, maybe you need to take the time then to figure out your approach. Maybe spend a little more extra time on that, getting the product kind of, the initial product kind of right, or as we just said, spending time working on the team before you get out there. Because once the gun goes off, once you promise something to someone, right, whether that's a co-founder, whether that's a customer, or whether that's an investor, now you're on the clock, and now you're completely going to have to be at the whim of someone else's timing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this brings me to like, another big thing that a lot of entrepreneurs are worried about, especially newer entrepreneurs, which is sort of this time to market rush, or being first to market in their perception, right? And I think, one of the things that I always think about is the fact that often these things don't happen in isolation, and often the idea isn't even as novel as you thought it is. If the market that you're entering really is, that big and open, then there's probably someone else doing something like it out there, or in the process of doing something like it. So, what are your thoughts on this whole sort of getting to market, first to market, time to market? I mean, you kind of already said that, but I'm sure you can elaborate.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, it's another idea of your idea ain't worth shit, right? We talk about Facebook. We all know Facebook wasn't first to market, right? What happens? The first person that charges onto beats gets shot, right? And that doesn't mean they don't succeed. I mean, sometimes they do, right? And that doesn't mean, I think people kind of misinterpret the way that advice goes, right? Which means, well, then I should really just wait, and I should really just follow someone else's, and go after that. That's not necessarily the point. It's really to understand, like anything you do as an entrepreneur, you don't know what's going to happen, but it's like, it's the risk of it, and try to understand, like, what are the risks that make sense. And I think one, again, that's in your control, and that we do see a lot of people do, is just a rush to get that into market, right? And a lot of that comes from just enthusiasm, right? Passion, right? Which you need to be a good entrepreneur. And a lot of that comes with, I see a problem and I've got the solution. I want to, it's got to get out there, and I got to do that before someone else takes it, right? And, a little bit of that is having confidence in yourself and your team. And a lot of that, I think, is just understanding that if you rush something to product, what you're doing actually is paying a much greater cost, which is people's initial perception.
Yeah.
Right. We all know nowadays people have extremely short attention spans. People don't give anybody else a chance. You see one thing you don't like, and you're like, dude, I'm not going to talk to that person again. Right. I'm going to block them. I'm going to ghost them. I'm not even going to worry about that again. Right. And that's no different. Let's say about when you roll out your app, or, when you've got that first contact out with a potential customer, and you're like, listen, I got this great thing, dude, this is great. This is so exciting. And you're basically all passion. And then the product, quote unquote, that the state that it's in doesn't live up to that. And now you've got a person who's kind of turned off by your idea, or worse, turned off by you. Yeah. Right. So it's, again, especially in this market now, right, it makes sense to take the time. And I understand how frustrating that might be, because I've been there. We've all, any entrepreneur has been there. But you know what? It's time that's better spent. It's time to say, listen, I don't want to just blindly rush onto the beach and be the first person to get shot. At least if I'm going to do that, then I'm going to have a plan where maybe I don't get shot.
Well, right. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, people people underestimate the value of being later to market, because you can see all the mistakes and learn from all the mistakes that those first movers had to learn the hard way, right? So if you're smart, you're able to see, okay, what we're doing is kind of like this, and then, make somewhat of an adjustment. And when we look at, I mean, you mentioned Facebook. I mean, Google's another example, not the first search engine, right? Like, they learned a lot from how other people were running search, and obviously changed their business model a million times since they started. But ultimately, they were able to achieve what they achieved because they learned from the people who came before them in the same space. The same is true for Facebook. They learned from the early social media movers. So, I mean, I think the other big thing here is, like, and I think this is a really key point, is it's more important to do your due diligence up front. Spend more time doing that market research and making sure that you're doing the right thing. And I think that a lot of people underestimate how much of that really is done in the venture space. A lot of entrepreneurs think, it's like Steve Jobs sitting in a garage with Woz and, like, just building computers, right? And that's not how a lot of companies are built. I mean, a lot of the people on these teams really are very intelligent people who did a lot of research to figure out that this product in this market seemed like there could be a real fit here. Obviously, there's a lot of work that goes into launching it afterwards, right? But yeah, I mean, I would say, from my perspective, and I've always been a big, like, team and timing are huge. I think that you're sort of completely, like, nailing down what every founder needs to hear, before they start rushing to market with a product, rushing to talk to investors. Because, from my experience working with founders when I was doing sort of tech and software consulting, and I wasn't really focused on, like, holistically building a venture in the way that we are today. I was just the software guy, right? And I had to sit by and watch these founders go and make promises they couldn't deliver on to, like, major companies. And ultimately, all those relationships and all those bridges got burned. And so when they were actually ready a year later to try and actually talk to those people, they either didn't get the email back or met with a lot of skepticism.
Exactly.
Right. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing we're implying in this is that the market is big enough to, in other words, wait for somebody else, right? And spend the time thinking about it. And which just call that out, which is, listen, if the market is too small, don't do this, right? I mean, there's some weird little thread that's kind of like I'm going to find this, like, really nichey thing. And this goes back to my idea is so perfect because no one else has thought of this. And this could exist for, like, like, if you're going to do that, like, you're in the wrong industry.
Yeah.
Right. Because these companies are not fast moving. Right. Like, we've, worked with a lot of different companies. I've had some pretty early exits, but even an early exit is not fast in the scheme of what we're talking about here. So if you've got something that you think is just going to disappear, because someone else is going to think of it, and it's truly like that, then this is probably not the right way to tackle that, right? The problem, the right way to tackle that maybe to go to an incumbent and be like, I've got this deal for you for a joint venture or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So you can get to market instantly,
Right.
Because really what we're talking about here is, we want to be able to hit the right market in the right way.
Yeah.
And that's really the key here. And again, it's your idea isn't by itself worth shit there.
Cool. Well, I know we're in agreement. So at this point, I think, is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners today?
The only thing I just an opportunity for us to talk a little bit more about what we do, and why that's different, right? And I think a lot of what we do is informed by this experience that we have to as a venture studio, support entrepreneurs in this journey with our experienced help, right? And I think, this is a model that I've come into. I started a lot of companies without a venture studio or even working with a venture studio. Look, we're not the only people with this idea. Here we go again, right? Like, it's a good idea, and hey, we're ripping it off because we think we can do it better in a certain way, right? Yeah. And I think that what I've seen, in terms of the strength of venture studios and the strength of the companies that come out of that, is the focus, is the process, is the fact that you're taking this journey with people. And yeah, you know what? There is a cost and equity associated with that. But you weigh that equity against taking your right shot, against the time involved, and against, I think, the most important thing, and the data is out there, with the probability of getting good funding at good valuations, right? Yeah. And when you put all those pieces together, and again, it's the same thing of saying, like, listen, let's say you weren't going to do a venture studio, and you're going to go and to someone who's very, very experienced and say, I want you on my team. Well, that person's going to cost more in terms of cost and equity than someone, again, that you went to college with, right? Yeah. By definition. Would you think it's worth it? Well, I don't know, but I would imagine it probably is. I mean, I can imagine situations where it's not, sure. But I mean, yeah, that's a thing that we're thinking about. So a venture studio is, in my mind, in our vision, just a structure that does that. Right. And it is generating, kind of a hit after hit, in terms of the companies that it works with.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think we're pretty sold on the studio model. And I mean, the inspiration, as I alluded to before, I think comes from that experience of, you have a lot of experience coming from sort of the entrepreneurship and investment side. I have a lot of experience coming from working with entrepreneurs, and at times investors, to launch these companies. And, it's frustrating, looking at people who are not sort of taking your advice and not following the right path. And not, there's going to be a lot of other sort of jumping off points, I think, for future podcasts from this conversation. But really just not doing the right thing, not following the right process, thinking that they know how to do it because they've seen it in movies or read about it in books, and not really knowing how it's really done, right? And so, yeah, I mean, to your point, if you were to bring on a really savvy entrepreneur investor, you would give away a big chunk of your company in order to do that. And then you would also have to worry about fundraising and doing all these other things. So I think, there is a really strong argument, to consider, looking at this model. And I think, for the entrepreneurs who are out there either looking for a turnkey solution or looking for a group of people who, could believe in them, they could consider, the venture studio model, whether, with us or another venture studio that might be better aligned, right? Like, we don't work with everyone, and we have our own sort of criteria. So, yeah, but I think, we can sort of pick that up in another podcast. So, Ted, thanks for your time, and listeners, we will catch up with you next time.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Look forward to talking again.
Welcome to Sticky Ventures Podcast, where Mike and Ted dig into the obvious things people ignore to help you build amazing startups.